Alright guys, welcome back. I got kind of a hokey little setup going on here for you. We got a cold day today. Right now it's 18 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about this much Celsius. You can see we've got our 990FX motherboard. We've got the Enermax AIO with the radiator and the fans hanging out the window. And underneath here is the Phenom II X4 960T, the RX 580, 8 gigabytes of DDR3. And we're just going to go through and just play around and push this thing, see how cold we can get it and how far we can push this chip once it's cold. So really guys, the goal for me is just to use the cold outside air to help push the CPU up and still be Cinebench stable. As I go up, I run R15, I check the temperature of the CPU, and then I go and I push it as far as it'll go with this setup. This is a quick, down and dirty way. I have no meters or probes attached. I'm relying basically just on the sensors on the chips in the main board to be fairly accurate. I also have to bring in the radiator every time I shut it down so it doesn't freeze up on me. I also need to remind myself every time I have to clear the CMOS or swap a chip to increase the fan and pump speeds. I tend to keep forgetting that. And as you see here, it's significantly cooler after I remember. So that run completed with the CPU in single digits. Once I find the furthest I want to push it, then I close all running programs and I run it again. And then I can get a more accurate score, which is really meaningless when I'm not comparing it to anything else, but it's there for future reference, I guess. And this Phenom II X4 960T was able to overclock from its base frequency of 3 gigahertz to 4.3, so that's pretty good. I could have pushed more with more vCore, but I actually used the CPU and I don't want to risk killing it. So next I try to push a Phenom II X4 955, and I only managed to crease it from the base 3.2 to 4.0, and it was pretty warm considering the cooling. So I abandoned that one to move on. Next up is an Athlon II X2 B28 with a base frequency of 3.4 gigahertz. It booted into Windows at 4.5, but it wasn't R15 stable. So I dropped it down to just under 4.5 as opposed to adding a little more vCore. I've been trying to limit the vCore to 1.6, and I set LLC so it stays as close to that under load. Temperature-wise, it stays in the single digits, so let's go ahead and run it. And as you can see, it made it through. So onto a CPU that has been nothing but trouble for me in the past. This is an Athlon II X3 445. It's a quad-core Phenom with one core and L3 cache disabled with a base frequency of 3.1 gigahertz. It does unlock, but it'll never boot once it does, so either the disabled core or the cache is truly defective on this chip. It ran at 4 gigahertz with just under 1.6 vCore, and I gave it a little more just to get it to 4.1 gigahertz. Bumped up to 1.62 vCore to be exact, and it was running. Temps looked good, so I closed everything out and I ran it again, and poof, it actually died. I'm not going to miss this chip though, and this is why I generally wasn't pushing the vCore over 1.6. Alright, on to the next CPU. This is an Athlon II X2 235, and testing it at 3.8 gigahertz, it barely gets above zero under load. That would make you think there's a long way to go yet. With a stock base clock of 2.7 gigahertz, it managed to top out at 4.0 with temps still not much above zero and made it through a Cinebench run no problem. Up next is one of my better overclockers. This is an Athlon II X2 270. It already has a decent stock base clock at 3.4 gigahertz, and it'll clock to 4.2 easily on air with core temps in the 50s. On this setup, it just broke double digits at 4.2. It booted into Windows at 4.65, and it managed to finish R15 at 4.5 gigahertz. Next up is the Athlon II X2 B26 with a stock base clock of 3.2 gigahertz. At 4.3 gigahertz, temps stayed easily in the single digits under load and completed R15 at 4.63 gigahertz. Alright, so now onto a 6-core Phenom 2. This is the 1035T, has a stock base clock of 2.6 gigahertz, and it only managed 4 gigahertz with temps in the teens. Being that this is a Thuban core CPU, I could have easily given it more vCore, but again, I'm trying to mitigate the risk of killing chips. And last but not least, I decided to try a big boy, the FX8350. This isn't one of the better 8350s out there silicone-wise either. The best I could ever do on air was 4.8, and it was hot. With a base clock of 4 GHz, the cold made 4.8 a breeze. Sub-zero at idle and under load it only reached 30s, and that was also with me forgetting to turn the fan speed back up. With the cold, I was really hoping to get it to 5 GHz, and I wasn't really sure if it would make it. On this particular CPU, the jump in V-core to go from 4.7 to 4.8 was pretty big, so I really had my doubts. And look how fast that temperature drops once the load is gone. And in the end, I was pretty surprised. It actually did 5.2 gigahertz. The V-core is set to just over 1.5 in the BIOS, 1.476 under load with LLC set, according to HW monitor. Temps actually topped out in the 50s at the end of an R15 run, so I think 5.2 is probably going to be the limit. I wish I had at least set up the watt meter to see the difference in power consumption from stock to 5.2 on this chip. I may have to look at this again. I'm usually pretty curious about stuff like that, and I'm sure this is really making my meter spin. There was a time when over 800 score on R15 would have been pretty awesome, but these days a Ryzen 2400G can do it, running very cool and using very little power. But in the end, this is just for fun, something to do on an otherwise boring day. I may try this setup again on a socket 775 board next and see what we can push there. Anyways, I hope you guys are all doing okay, staying warm, and I will catch you on the next one.